Hello and welcome to my channel Polyglot Reading. My name is David and today I'm going to present a review of the New York Trilogy by Paul Auster. The reason for this is an initiative of a group of very active Italian-speaking booktubers, which I've recently joined, and in this group, about twice a year, we simultaneously publish a series of videos on a selected author, and every one of us makes a video about at least one of this author's most important works, and in a way that, as a group, we cover as much as possible of this author's entire work. If you do understand Italian, then please take a look at the show notes of my Italian version of this video, where I list all the channels involved and the other works of Paul Auster that they are reviewing at the same time as me today. Okay, but let's go back to the New York Trilogy, which I read in this beautiful English edition published by the Folio Society, a publishing house from the UK that publishes beautifully crafted editions of older as well as of more modern classics, always beautifully bound and usually illustrated exclusively for these editions by contemporary artists. The New York Trilogy consists of three novels: City of Glass, Ghosts, and Locked Room. And although these three novels are always referred to as the New York Trilogy, this is not a trilogy in the usual sense. There is no constant narrative thread running through all these three novels, as you would expect from a trilogy. There is no clear sequence of activities along these three novels. They are three quite independent novels or longer stories, and each one with a completely separate and unique plot, but with some elements that link them to each other. For one thing, they're all situated in New York, and the anonymity, the complexity, and inscrutability of this big city plays an important role in all three novels. Secondly, there are a few names of characters that appear in more than one of the novels, as well as certain motifs and frequently recurring thought experiments of the author. And I would like to emphasize three specific motifs in particular, which play a central role in all three novels. Firstly, all three novels are about a protagonist who has the task of either finding or observing a certain target person. Secondly, the identity and the intentions of the person being searched for or observed become increasingly unclear, mysterious, and contradictory in the course of the research or in the course of the observation. And thirdly, the observing or searching protagonist almost loses himself in the search for observation. The task of research becomes an obsession that determines the protagonist's entire thoughts and actions and leads them to neglect or downright dismantle their entire normal bourgeois life, even to the point of jeopardizing their very existence. What these three novels also have in common is that Paul Auster experiments here with new narrative forms and novel structures and works a lot with the postmodern means of metafiction. The protagonists realize that they are only characters in a fiction and a text, and vice versa. The author, Paul Auster, also becomes a protagonist or a person in one of the novels. At least in the first novel, City of Glass, the main protagonist actually seeks advice from an author called Paul Auster. He visits him and he gets to know both his wife Siri and their son Daniel, and these names are actually identical to the family of the real author, Paul Auster. And Paul Auster uses elements of postmodernism here, but also explicitly refers to much older historical models or concepts. For example, in the 10th chapter of the novel City of Glass, this is very revealing in this respect. Here, there's a dialogue between the main protagonist, Daniel Quinn, and the person called Paul Auster. And here, parallels are drawn to the novel Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes, this early 17th century masterpiece, in which also the boundary between reality and fiction is frequently blurred, and where also the author Cervantes hides behind other fictitious authors, and even the protagonist, Don Quixote, who has, by the way, the same initials as the protagonist, Daniel Quinn. Also, Don Quixote seems to realize in a couple of chapters that he himself is not a real person, but also a character in a chivalric novel. Another element that all three stories have in common is that they are a sort of a new original type of detective story that works quite differently from the usual recipes of that genre. Unfortunately, the ideas and concepts that Paul Auster introduced here were not really taken up by crime fiction authors of the following decades, and they did not really catch on. And this is a pity, because I think it would have paved the way for crime fiction of a much higher literary quality than what we see on the market today, as mass productions always getting more bloodthirsty and in need of ever more shocking effects. But now let's get back and take at least a superficial look at the plot of the three novels before I give a personal assessment and evaluation from my personal point of view at the end of this video. Let's start with the City of Glass. The main character of the novel is a crime author, Daniel Quinn, who is mistaken for a private detective named Paul Auster. And he is given the task of shadowing a religious scholar named Peter Stillman, or Peter Stillman Sr., to be more precise, who has just been released from prison and has presumably gone mad. The client is the son, Peter Stillman Jr., and this Peter Stillman Jr. was raised as a child by his father for many years in a dark room without any human contact as part of a crazy experiment, namely to find out whether there is a sort of a universal original language in mankind, a kind of language of God, which maybe emerge in this way by isolating a child from any external influence on its language acquisition. And through an accident, or rather a stroke of luck, namely a house fire, this terrible experiment is uncovered. It becomes known to the authorities, and the father, Peter Stillman Sr., was sentenced to a long prison term. And at the time the actual novel begins, Peter Stillman Jr. is now an adult, he's married, and he fears that his father, after being released from prison, will go after him and will try to kill him, because that's exactly what he has threatened to do in his letters from prison. And so Daniel Quinn initially tries to clear up the misunderstanding that he is not the private detective Paul Auster, but when he fails to do so, he finally gets along with it and takes on this tailing job. And for weeks and months, he now follows Peter Stillman Sr., who has been released from prison, and Stillman Sr. behaves in an extremely weird and enigmatic way. wandering for hours every day through a narrowly defined part of New York, picking up and collecting seemingly useless and broken objects and unraveling this mystery of Peter Stillman Sr.'s behavior, this mania for walking and collecting, becomes a veritable obsession for David Quinn, for Daniel Quinn, and he logs in his notebooks every step that Peter Stillman takes, and he spends hundreds of hours poring over his notes, virtually living on the streets and in dumpsters to ensure a 24/7 tale, and ultimately losing his entire bourgeois existence. I won't you tell any more so as not to spoil anything. The second novel, Ghost, is the most abstract one and the most characterized by formal and symbolic gimmicks. This starts with the naming of the characters, who are all named after colors, which makes it clear that the focus here is less on their individuality but much more on their function, that they are fictional characters or other archetypes of certain functions in a story or in a crime story. And the core of the plot is rather simple. A private detective named Blue is commissioned by a mysterious client named White to observe a certain person named Black. But it is not specified what crime Black is actually suspected of, and in order to carry on with this task of observing Black, Blue is given a completely equipped flat directly opposite Black's apartment, and now he observes what Black is doing on a daily basis for almost a year and a half, and Black's actions are completely unspectacular. Apart from a few walks, he seems to spend most of his days reading or writing at his desk, and Blue's only obligation is to write a weekly report about Black and Black's behavior and send it to a P.O. box address. Blue becomes so engrossed in observing, and he connects so strongly with Black's personality and habits that he begins to think like Black and to basically be able to predict Black's actions. And over time, there grows a suspicion in him that Black is not only the person to be observed, but that Black is actually his very client who has commissioned this observation, and this confuses him greatly. And under various disguises, he then tries to make direct contact with Black and to engage him in conversation with the hope to learn something more about this whole setup. And he succeeds in doing so, and the both of them, Black and Blue, end up having some interesting conversation about literature, but also about anecdotes about famous American writers. But still, Blue is spiraling down into a very obsessive behavior regarding this observation. He starts to completely neglect his own private life and his social ties and his fiancée in the course of this obsessive observation. And a final desperate attempt to visit Black without any disguise and to unmask Black and to finally confront him with this suspicion. This leads to a dramatic catastrophe that ends fatally for one of them. And I won't tell you more in order not to spoil the novel too much. The third novel, Locked Doors, is much more accessible and comparatively easy to read after the very abstract Ghost, which was a little tiring to read in parts due to its dryness. And Locked Doors, it's much closer to conventional narrative patterns, and the characters are described in a much more detailed way, much more credible as real people endowed with many biographical details and individual character traits. And the first-person narrator, who remains anonymous, reports on his childhood friend Fanshawe, an exceptionally and sort of weird person, very talented and with writing ambitions, who has written a lot but never published anything. The starting point of the story is that Fanshawe has suddenly disappeared, leaving his wife and his child without any notice, and the narrator is now commissioned by Fanshawe's wife, Sophie, to look after Fanshawe's literary heritage and to endeavor to publish his literary works. And the narrator does so with great success, and this brings him into very close contact with Fanshawe's wife, Sophie. And so they grow closer over time, they fall in love, and at the end they even marry, and the narrator also adopts Fanshawe's son. However, over time, some suspicion starts to grow with him that the whole development may have been planned and foreseen by Fanshawe, and that he, the narrator, was just a sort of a puppet following Fanshawe, pulling the strings and taking on Fanshawe's role as part of a big master plan. And this is triggered by an anonymous letter that he receives, and that is supposedly written by Fanshawe and indicating that Fanshawe is still alive and observing all the developments very closely and approving of them. And this increases the desire of the first-person narrator to find Fanshawe and to discover the motivation behind all this plan. And similar to the novel Ghost, the search here also leads to a veritable obsession on the part of the narrator, who succumbs to this obsession to find Fanshawe and discover the plan behind the plot, thereby jeopardizing and dismantling his own existence and that of his family. And again, I don't want to reveal any more about the plot, just this much. Here too, there's a dramatic, even disturbing finale in the form of a real showdown. So, what is my personal opinion on the New York Trilogy? That's not that easy, because it is a mixed one. Anyone who loves intellectual thought experiments with metafictional narrative structures and who likes to be involved in puzzle games between fictionality and reality, that person will surely enjoy these novels. There's no doubt that they are technically very original and sophisticated. However, those readers who seek for a catching narration, an inventive fabulation, and detailed creation of fictional worlds, they will probably find these novels less enjoyable. And personally, I'm in the middle between the two. I can certainly appreciate Paul Auster's originality, and I recognize and appreciate the intellectual achievement behind these three truly extraordinary and unusual novels. But for me, in particular, the second novel, Ghost, remains too much of a theoretical didactic piece. It's sort of dry and anemic. I try to put it into a parable or a picture, and instead of a gripping musical show in whose plot we can immerse ourselves. We are given a detailed tour of all the backstage machinery and all its technical details, which is designed for the experts only. We are shown all the mechanisms of the stage, the sound and the lighting technology and the trapdoors and the machinery for all the tricks and illusions. They're demonstrated to us in a very technical way by an ingenious and enthusiastic engineer, which is all very impressive, but only very occasionally we catch a glimpse of the actual action of the play, which is less captivating for its own sake, but primarily interesting because it demonstrates how all these little gears work together in perfection. That's how I felt when I read these novels, in particular the second one, Ghost. I cannot shake off the impression that Paul Auster overshoots the mark here. The puzzle game and the technical sophistication of the writing, they have become an end in themselves. And like an impressively complicated finger exercise for a virtuoso concert pianist, this is fascinating, but it's not gripping, moving concert piece in which you can really relish and enjoy. In this sense, I think Paul Auster fails a little bit to fulfill or satisfy his own quality criteria, which in the novel City of Glass, the character Paul Auster formulates himself in chapter 10. I quote, "And that's finally all anyone wants out of a book, to be amused." And I think this is something, the real amusement is something which is lacking a bit in these novels. I believe this is not a fundamental shortcoming of postmodern novels in general, because other authors like Jorge Luis Borges, like Umberto Eco, Italo Calvino, or Vladimir Nabokov, they have all shown us that entertaining and captivating reading experiences are possible with the narrative means of postmodernism and can result in a very lively and reader-friendly novel. So for my taste, only the third book in this trilogy, the novel Locked Room, fully succeeds in doing this. It is in fact amusing and captivating. The first one, City of Glass, only succeeds with some reservations, and the second one, Ghost, fails, in my opinion. For me, it is rather academically interesting, but not a good entertainment for the average reader, unless he or she is a professional literary scholar or literary critic. It is much too technical, too anemic, and too dry for that. A bit of a pity for so much misguided narrative talent, which Auster can bring to bear much better in other books for the reader's enjoyment. Okay, that's all for today. Thanks for watching this video. If you have enjoyed it or want to discuss it, please leave me a comment below. See you next time. Take care. Bye-bye and ciao.